Why do we learn? What do we learn? And how do we apply what we learn in the real world? These were some of the questions I wanted to answer when I started this podcast. Along the way, it became something else. I truly believe that each person has a unique story to share and understand the world in their own experience. There was a beautiful quote by Robert Caro that said, when we deeply understand the story of one individual, truths about a lot of individuals start to emerge. And today I'm going to speak to one such storyteller. This is a person whose writing I've engaged with and read for quite some time on the internet, and it's such an honor and pleasure to be able to speak to her on this podcast today. So, a little bit about Aditi before we jump into this conversation. And the listeners tuning in, I will be linking Aditi's work, so please do explore that once you listen to this podcast. So, Aditi is the writer behind Filtered Copy or Cappy, which is a nice pun, and it's a newsletter that explores the intersection of history and money. She examines past events from multiple perspectives to give the reader a clearer picture of what happened in the past, which in turn helps us understand our present. Her writing covers a range of topics such as who profited from building the Suez Canal, uncovering the financial reasons behind the French Revolution, and sharing inspiring stories of Indian women throughout history. Aditi began her career as a chartered accountant and has experience in tax filing, accounting, finance, and startup consulting across Mumbai and Hong Kong. These diverse experiences give her a unique perspective on business and economics. Apart from writing and her career in accounts, she loves to read and play badminton, and she believes that stories truly make the world go around. And today she's here to share her story. So, Aditi, thank you so much for making time for this conversation. I know you're based in Hong Kong, I'm based in Mumbai, so thank you also to technology to make this conversation possible. But to start the conversation, Aditi, I just wanted to go back to your roots. I know that you grew up in Bombay, so I'd love to hear some stories of Aditi at school. What were you curious about at school? What were you curious about outside school? Maybe you can tell me about growing up in Bombay and your parental influences too.
So much for having me. It means a lot. And also thank you for reading my work. I'm really grateful and I'm really grateful for your time. So thank you. Um, I grew up in Bombay in the 1990s. Uh, I had a very sheltered home life. Grew up in a very religious family. We were very religious, but super loving, super caring. My dad is a stockbroker and my mom is a homemaker. We used to live, um, growing up, we used to live in this old building in Opera House in Mumbai, and we used to live on the fifth floor. And at that time, there were no lifts, so every day, like twice, thrice a day, I had to my entire family, we used to like climb up the stairs. And ever since that time, I think I have imbibed Po from Kung Fu Panda. Now I look at stairs and I'm like, enemy, my greatest enemy. Like stairs are my greatest enemy. Uh, and growing up, uh, I went to a convent school. Out there, I was not the best at studies. I was very average. Um, I felt I should have asked more questions. I should have been more curious during my school life. I should have explored more topics which genuinely interested me. But just between schoolwork, I didn't really find the joy that I was looking for. But uh, I enjoyed playing sports. I loved the adrenaline rush it gave me. I was very competitive. I um, enjoyed history as a subject, particularly Indian civic history. I felt like it told stories from the past, and like the choices that our leaders made uh, brought us to where we are right now. So I love reading biographies on Nehru, on Patel, on Gandhiji, how the atmosphere was like, especially during independence, um, during emergency. So that really grounded me. I also enjoyed. So in school, we were taught Shakespeare in the I think in the eighth standard, ninth standard, tenth standard. So I enjoyed Caesar and Uncle Tom's Cabin was it really impacted me quite deeply. Like that's the first time I understood um, racism and segregation. Um, it 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 opened it opened my worldview up that I'm not the most important person on planet Earth. No, like um, you need to understand different perspectives, and the world is so huge, it's so vast. Like there's so much to explore and so little time. Um, yes. So growing up, that was my schooling time. Um, for my home life, I was really lucky. Like my mom would sit me down, would educate me, she would quiz me, she would be in the morning, I remember, she would feed me and my sister chawanprash and like tell us to like recount math tables. I'm like, no, I don't want to do it. She's like, you need to do it. Like recount the tables now. And she taught me math and history and English. And um, yes, she also taught me how to play sports. She taught me table tennis and badminton. In the afternoon, she would take me and my sister to YMCA just to play table tennis. And she taught me how to cycle. Her She is still very active, and she's a go-getter. So I think I want to believe that I want to imbibe her spirit and try and do the best that I can in whatever I am doing, and do it with intentionality. Like be intentional about it. Don't half-ass things. Try and do your best. If you fail, then it's fine, but at least you did your best. Um, Growing up, one of my favorite memories is the time that I spent with my granddad. So my sister and I have an elder sibling. So we used to sleep next to my granddad in his room, and my granddad used to tell us stories. They were religious stories, like stories about God and um, so we are Jains. So she used to tell us about the Tirthankars and the stories, and they were the same stories. Like he knew probably a dozen, 15 of them, and every night before bed, I would want to, I would pester him till he would tell us stories. And I think that's the first time I truly understood. Um, I truly grasped the meaning of like what a story is, what it can how it can change you, how you can use it as a communication language. I think that's the way my granddad also communicated with us. And so that was my first foray into it. And um, during the daytime, we used to love to watch tennis on the TV. He was also super competitive and like, oh my God, look at the way he's hitting the ball. Like, that's how you make a shot. And very passionate about sports. Uh, yes, he was also an avid reader. Every morning before breakfast, my granddad and my dad used to sit next to each other, read the newspaper. So I remember in my late teens, like in my early 20s, I used to get up, read the newspaper, go through the financial section. I didn't understand a lot, but I did try. I did try at least finding out topics that I might be curious about, might be interested in. I saw the way titles were framed and the way the language was written. So I was really curious as a kid. And certain memories that I have, especially like after my 10th standard board exams, I spent I think it was a couple of months I spent at Crossroads at Kemp's Corner. So it's a bookshop, and I am so grateful for that bookshop because I remember the the next day after my exams ended, I went to the bookstore. I found my spot right at the back of the library. It was, I think, in the young adult section, and I devoured books. I read um, Ken Follett, the Century trilogy books. I read Jeffrey Archer, Cain and Abel, Sidney Sheldon, Tell Me Your Dreams, and Master of the Game. And I was a voracious reader. Like I would, and reading, it just enhanced my imagination. It it changed my worldview. Like that, there's so much in the world out there. Like there's so much to um, read, understand, learn. And in the I think that's the first time I understood the power of the written word. As a reader, you can feel so many emotions in a simple line, and I think that's the beauty of any creative outlet. Like when you're watching a movie, if there's a scene, you can feel so many emotions, and that's when that's done with intention. It's beautiful, and yeah. So that's when I understood the power of uh, reading. And for me, if I have to pinpoint when I fell in love with reading was in the eighth standard when I picked up a Harry Potter book, and oh, like still gives me chills. Like Harry Potter is, I think, why I want to be a writer, why I am a writer. I had gone to my nanny's house, and there was just a copy of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone just lying there. I picked it up. I read the first chapter, and it was just magical. Um, like she can really evoke a sense of magic, character building, um, the story arcs, which for me as a young reader was just beautiful. That wow, there's a world out there. Like it doesn't even have to be out there. It's in my mind, and I get to experience that. So that was, yes, my growing up and books and reading, and yeah.
Yeah, there was so many amazing stories there, Aditi, and
Thank
I loved how you spoke about that relationship with your mother and your
you.
grandfather so lovingly. You know, the time that they gave you and those
Yeah,
conversations they had with you. I think it really has an impact in the long run. And
yeah,
because you grew up in Bombay in the 80s and 90s, I'm just curious, like, because India came out of liberalization at around that time, you
yeah.
know were there things you noticed growing up in Bombay in the 90s and early 2000s that made you think about things differently? And when you spoke to your, because sometimes I would speak to my parents because they grew up in Bombay, and I remember a
Mm,
time where they would say there was only one channel, there was only
yeah,
a few drinks or a few things to eat. So,
yeah.
like, any thoughts about Bombay in that time and what you observed growing up?
Mm. So, I was born in 1992, so that was after liberalization. But what I did realize growing up, um, was just the freedom of movement I feel my mom felt. Like,
Mm,
we didn't really have a washing machine in the start. We had so a lot of our time would go in the kitchen or doing laundry. But later on, as life became better, she found a lot more time and space to do what she wanted to do. So even when we were growing up, we had the option to travel, where before we couldn't travel that much. But I think as my dad's income grew, and we as my sister and I also grew up, he felt more comfortable in taking us out, in exploring more options than what was there before. So growing up for me was, yes, a lot more freedom in movement, a lot of freedom to choose between different options. Where previously you had only like one option, because of liberalization, there was a lot more freedom of choice. Yeah,
And like, because I often think about that, and I remember reading some of your early pieces where I remember this piece you wrote about the use of the solar cooker after
yeah,
independence, and it was really
yes,
promoted from a central sort of top-down policy, but
yes,
because they didn't really understand how it would be used on a day-to-day basis, and the
yeah,
policymakers were not people that cooked on a daily basis themselves.
yeah,
Reading that piece made me realize that there's so much there's so much intricacy to policy making in general. You
yeah,
have to really understand life of the people that will be affected by those
yeah,
policies. And
yeah,
as a country, India has gone through so many phases, whether it's our post independence era, liberalization, even more recently with the use
mm,
of technology and Aadhaar payments, to
yeah,
make transactions so much more
yeah,
easier.
yes,
I mean, subconsciously, so many of these things affect our day-to-day
yes,
conversations and relationships as well. So just hearing you speak about, that freedom that your family may have got was quite interesting to listen to. And, you spoke about stories, Aditi. So in this world of Harry Potter, which I also love, sometimes because I was born in 93 myself, and Harry Potter was the movie and the book that we would go out and stand in line. And for 1 year, I
yeah.
actually stayed around Grant Road, Aditi. So I remember going
Oh,
to Kemp's Corner quite often and, you know,
mm,
visiting that beautiful bookstore there. But
yeah.
what did you like about the world of Harry Potter that J.K. Rowling built? And what what do you think was unique about that story, according to you?
For me, it was the world building,
Hmm.
like the sense something for me. Like I was in school, so I was really young. Um, okay, magic exists. Magic is not only, what you read in fairy tales and stuff, but um, it's attainable in everyday life also. You just have to look for it. You have to look for the small instances of magic. It can happen in a small conversation you're having with your sibling, or someone, gave you a pat on the back, or you had a meaningful conversation with your friend. So, it's also in Harry Potter, you have great world building and also character development in, like, the friendship between Hermione, Ron, and Harry, the challenges Harry has to face. So I could envision the entire world in my mind's eye. And I think that's what really drew me to Harry Potter, and um, my love of books in general, that you have a short life, you can't experience everything. But in that moment, someone can draw a world for you. I think that is beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautifully put, Aditi, because we can experience so many worlds by
Yeah.
reading,
Yeah.
and we're not limited to our own
Yeah. And you're
world.
not limited to your own imagination. Someone else is drawing it for you, and then in your own head, you're making up tiny stories. And, like, oh, how would I be friends with Ron? Or, oh, no, Hermione did this, but would I do it like this? Should something else have happened? Like, there's so many y- you're always talking to yourself in your head, right? And having um and reading, not only Harry Potter, like reading in general, just really broadens your horizon and the questions you can ask your friends. Oh, did you enjoy that book? What like you can really have more interesting conversation. Like, what did
And
you think about that topic? Or yeah,
yeah, I completely agree, Aditi. And like coming back to your school days, Aditi, in
yeah,
India, growing up in the 90s, like medicine and engineering were the preferred sort of career options. And then a lot of students also adopted for law or the chartered accountancy path. So I'm just curious about your thoughts when you were in grade 9, grade 10? Like, were you always curious about chartered accountancy as a career? Were there people that were guiding you with that decision? And like, how did you decide to study chartered accountancy, and what were you studying at university at the same time?
So when in grade 9 and 10, I chose commerce and I dropped science because science was not my forte. Um, I just I was just lacking something in the basics. I was just not connecting in my head. So I chose commerce. Then when I came to college, university, I chose chartered accountancy because it was the only profession in commerce which would allow me to interact with the professional world. Like it would
Mhm.
take me outside the classroom, and um, I would have to deal with real clients with real problems, uh, which actually needed solutions from my side. So I was really excited to step out of the classroom and get an experience. And plus, I could make some money, so that was great. Uh, yes, um, so when I was doing my chartered accountancy, I'm really grateful for all the experiences that I've had. Like it taught me, as my first job, it taught me how to manage my time. Like before, in college, like I could just like while away 3 hours, but like when you are working and you have college at the same time, I was doing a bachelor's of commerce simultaneously. So it teaches you how to be more responsible, how you should present yourself in a corporate setup, how do you talk to your seniors, your clients. Um, so it gave me a real sense of purpose and joy that and um, give me a sense of confidence that okay, I can do this, I can multitask, and um, even like basic tasks, which now you consider basic, like Excel, or like I became really competent because of my articleship and because of where I was working. It was a very nurturing and a great environment to learn. They were super helpful, and plus this was the first time in my life where I met people outside from my own little bubble of college and school. So, you get to interact with seniors, with people who've come from outside Bombay, who have a different worldview than your own. And I really value that.
Yeah, I think like, and because I have a background in teaching and education, Aditi, I'm always curious about learning experiences. So in this, like, how do you become a CA in India? Like, if you do opt for it, what is the path? And I know you mentioned articleship. So does that have a specific structure apart from it being like a 2 to 3 year timeline? And does it always take that much time, or can it be longer as well? So how do you become a CA in India is the larger question.
So you have three exams. I think the names have changed from my time, but there is a common entrance exam which you can give after your 12th standard. If I remember correctly, at least that is the way it was during my time. So you give that exam. Then after that, after a year, you have another exam. Um, so the CA itself, it's not only accounting. It's accounting, taxation, law, um, um, IT, which is basically more computers, costing. So it teaches you different skills, which and um, they um, they're really focused on real world applications.
Mm,
So it's not only a bunch of theory, but they're actually quite difficult, hard sums, um, um, interpretation of law. So it's studying for it is actually quite grueling and challenging, but it's very rewarding if you actually see it through.
mm.
Uh, yes, and sorry, and the final level is the CA exam, which is divided into two parts and has the subjects that I mentioned before. And I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, yeah, more or less, because I think you've given me a good understanding of the structure, Aditi. And
Yeah.
like, what
And
are
sorry, and it does take 2 3 years to do your articleship. Yeah,
okay?
I think that was your question.
Can it also take longer, Aditi? Like more than 3 years? Do some people like? I mean, if you need more time to clear the exam, would that
Uh,
be
so there's a definite time period for your articleship, and
okay?
then if you can take the exam again and again. So
Okay,
there's a set time which I think is 3 years, 2.5 to 3 years, when
okay.
you have to do your articleship. But
Very
then
interesting.
while you're appearing for exams, also you may work.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, because I'm always amazed, even my other friends that have cleared the exam. I know it's a very difficult exam to clear,
yeah,
and they would always tell me that they were doing college, they were doing their articleship, and they were
yeah,
studying for their CA exams
yeah,
at the same time. And I was
yeah,
like, how do you manage time? And many of them were doing other jobs,
yeah.
or because I know you get paid a certain amount, but it's the very minimal amount that they
Yes,
can
it's
pay an
very good.
article at that
Yeah.
time. So I think that's like to become a
It
CA,
teaches
like,
you work-life balance, like as to how to not, I'm sorry, I didn't mean work-life balance. I meant how to manage your time.
yeah,
Yes, how to manage your time properly. And plus,
makes,
like when you're younger, you can like get by with like less sleep.
yeah.
So, yeah,
I can imagine like that period must have been a lot of study and work and
yes, a
study
lot of
and
study. A lot
like,
of study, and I wasn't the best at studying, unfortunately. But touch wood, I had a lot of support in the terms of my family and my friends, and they were really there for me to support me, to cheer me up when I didn't clear. I didn't
mm,
clear for quite a few attempts, and it was really demoralizing and heartbreaking. And but I think now that I have some time to like look back on it, it's life is going to teach you the same lessons again and again. Like you have to eventually learn it.
true.
My what I think my problem was that I used to avoid the harder things. Like, oh, I don't like learning about costing. It's really hard. I'm not getting this. Let me just like leave it for now and I'll do it later. But that is not the right approach. And so you learn the same lesson, like, eat the frog, like do the hardest thing first. Make sure it's done. Make sure you understand that thing and then you move on. I can say that now. I didn't know that. The Aditi of like 10 years ago did not know that.
That's a great point. And like when this is more in terms of a skill perspective, Aditi. Like to become a good chartered accountant, what are some skills you need to have apart from understanding the theory well? Like if you could maybe tell me two or three skills that you think really experienced chartered accountants have, because I'm thinking about this period. It's sort of like an apprenticeship where
Yeah.
a new article is learning from a more experienced accountant
Yeah.
or working in a firm where they do it on a day-to-day
Yeah.
basis. So, are there some skills you are expected to develop at the end of this sort of articleship period?
Mhm. So at the end of the articleship period, um, um, your knowledge generally has a firm foundation.
Hmm.
You understand the problems a client is facing. You know how you can help them, what relevant taxation code applies to them, what sort of accounting help do they need. So you have a very solid foundation. What I think you also develop, I'm talking about the specific time period you mentioned, from like articleship to like giving your exam. Um, During the exam, it's when you're preparing for the exam, is when you learn mental toughness.
Hmm.
Again, this is Aditi from today talking about Aditi like 10 years ago. It's easy for me to think about it now, but I wasn't so mature when I was giving my exams. Um, you learn to you learn that if I fail this exam today, it's okay. I can give it again. It's
Hmm.
okay. It- the world has not crashed and burned. There will be a tomorrow, because failure is really hard. Like when you fail the CA exam, it really When you fail any exam, you feel you're questioning your self-worth, right? So I failed 6 times, and it really dented my confidence. But in that process, I realized who I am also. In the sense, I realized that I'm not a quitter. I don't quit. Like, I'm a slow learner, but I'm not a quitter. And eventually, like, it taught me, eat the frog. You don't know that thing. Ask for help. Go do past question papers. Just learn to eat that frog. And I think that skill has really stayed with me all these years. That don't avoid the hard thing. Accept that you're not getting this part, or you you are really bad at this part. Accept it. Ask for help, and then you feel much better once you're through. So um it's not when you're preparing for CA, whether you are a CA or not, um, you learn a lot of mental toughness and the ability to see things through. I think, yeah, those are the soft skills that you learn besides the hard skills.
And I, hearing you say this, Aditi, I just see, because your writing is very detailed, and I feel like you put a lot of time into making sure all the facts are being reviewed. And as a reader, I notice those
Thank you
things,
so much.
and like, and I feel like the often we don't completely understand the important role of a chartered accountant in an organization, because I have relatives and friends, close friends, that do it on a day-to-day basis. I feel like the chartered accountant has the closest vantage point to how a business or an organization is actually working, because they understand it from a very first principles perspectives about what is coming in, what is going out. And I think it may change depending on seniority. So, and like, once you clear it, I know you had, your first job for a couple of years, but what is the life of a chartered accountant like on a day-to-day basis? Because I'm wondering if there are some people curious about the field listening to this conversation. Like, if you could give me a glimpse of what a chartered accountant's life would be like on a day-to-day basis, or what they can expect based on your experience, that would be really nice to know.
So so once you become a chartered accountant, there are various fields that you can go into. You can go into international tax, direct tax, uh, accounting. You can go into auditing. You can go into there are many, many, many fields. Um, so I can't give a very general answer, but it is um, um, a fact that you learn to read the books of accounts mere like beyond the numbers. You learn to see a story by just like looking at the books of accounts. So, okay, 3 years ago, this was the situation. Then the company improved the stock flow. Because of the stock flow, there's increased turnover. There's a story that the numbers drive. So I can't really answer your question, but um, that is what I understood. Is that I can um, because it's again multidisciplinary. It gives you an idea of the different laws, the different tax laws, company law. So because of the approach to it, you can see multiple perspectives, and that helps you really draw a picture of a company. And because of that, your style of communication to people, it changes. Like, if I know you're in this XYZ department, you're in charge of petty cash, or or um, paying out salaries, I will talk to you in a specific way. Just so it gives you the ability to talk to different people
Wow. I
within
love
the organization.
And like, I think what you said, Aditi, about stories from numbers, that's
Yeah,
really beautifully put, because I
thank you.
think, more than the individuals involved, more than the policies on the ground, I think how the resources are utilized, I think you can learn a lot about an organization through how these resources have been allocated. And
yeah,
yeah, that makes, I mean, even though you didn't explain it in too much detail, I felt like
yeah,
that phrase really gave me a glimpse of what that is like.
yeah.
And I know you've had a very interesting, diverse career, because I know right now, you are doing startup consulting and you're also working in a content, role. But I'm just curious about your life as a reader, because you are, such an amazing writer. And I've noticed something, that almost all good writers are very unique readers. They read in a very specific way. They read certain kinds of books and the topics that they write about. So what are some of the books you know really enjoyed reading? And this could be in the areas of history, finance, business, but if you could tell me about maybe two or three books that you really loved and what you loved
Mhm,
about them, that would be
mhm.
great.
Okay. Um, mhm. So I've I've realized that I prefer reading books of authors who I really like. So I make sure, like, if my favorite author has written something else, I will pick that book up. For so Vivek Kaul, he's a great writer. He explains personal finance. Like his The thing with writing is you can't hide behind bad writing. It's either you've explained a concept well or you haven't. Like the reader knows. Like within 30 seconds, you know whether I'm faffing or do I actually have something to give you, some knowledge to share with you. So I love Morgan Housel's Psychology of Money. It's a great book for just learning how to manage your finances. I enjoy reading Vivek Kaul. He used to write Easynomics, and he has written a trilogy of books based like there is Bad Money. It explains the Indian situation, like yes, and uh, for history, I loved William Dalrymple's The Anarchy. It's concise, fast. It gives a brilliant overarching view, and then you have to select what you find interesting and be curious about, and like go and do your own research. So I love books which even do that. Like they're not super in depth, but they give you a fantastic overview, and then you see where you are interested and go down rabbit holes.
Yeah,
Like, I'm sorry, these are the only ones which are coming to my head right now. Or like, there are like many, but these are the only ones who are coming into my head.
no, these are good starting points, Aditi. I will
Yeah,
pick up, the recommendations that you have suggested. And the reason I'm curious about that is because when I was reading the piece that you wrote about how the British controlled India in I think it was a more recent piece, and I
yeah,
was I was trying to understand how you came up with the idea for that piece. What was your motivation behind, or was there a fact or an article that you read that led to that piece? Like, I'd love to discuss that process of how you first come up with an idea and convert it into um,
yeah,
a piece for your newsletter.
yeah, sure. So the piece you're mentioning was I was writing about the coming together of India in 1947. So I I was listening to uh, a podcast by Amit Verma,
Mm.
and he mentioned Narayani Basu's book on VP Menon. Like it's a book on VP Menon, and I read that book and I found it really interesting in the sense, like, of course I know, India became independent in 1947, and but you don't hear that much about VP Menon, who was critical in making sure that the princely states came on board. um there was no force, it, um, but we don't hear those stories. Like, imagine going up to like a Raja and being like, okay, give up your sovereignty and join Indian Union. No one's gonna do that willingly. But
Yeah.
you don't hear about bloodshed in 1940s. Like, y- when it comes to the princely states, not when it comes to partition. So there's so many stories to uncover, but we're not taught that in school. Why wasn't I taught that in school? So from there, I picked up VP Menin's book. It's called the story of integration of Indian princely states, and it's really fantastic. It's He goes through the process of how he and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel um, spoke to the Indian princes. What were their problems? Why did they not want to accede to India? What was the situation like in the 1930s and the 1920s when we still had so many princely states, and all the princely states had their own administration systems and their own taxation systems. So many things had to change to get to where we were in 1947. So when I read, so my most of my articles, they start out with a genuine curiosity of like, of how did this happen? How can you convince a really rich person to to give up the land,
Yeah.
to like be like, okay, here, take away my sovereignty? It doesn't sound logical to me.
Yeah.
So it starts with genuine curiosity and mostly from a book. Like, most of my best ideas, they come from books, and then I read more about it. I try and understand the different perspectives
Mm.
behind. So, what was India like in 1920s? What was India like in for women in the 1920s? Or what was it like living in a princely state in the 1920s? I try and make sure that I have enough context to understand what the atmosphere was like, because um, sometimes because the best stories have different perspectives. You can't really have just like a one-sided perspective. That's not I don't find that engaging. So so yes, then I try and build up the context, and then I try and read up more about, okay, this one thing happened, but could something else have happened if Patel if Sardar Patel, he did some other action. Could we have gone down a different path? So, so my, so I try and read more books on that particular topic, and I try and understand what the narrative was like, and I try and bring out my own conclusions as to, would things have been different. My goal with every piece that I write is to understand the past and see how our past affects our present. Because one of my pet peeves is that news articles, they only focus on the present. Like, you have 24/7 coverage of only what's happening in the present, but not um but there's no deeper analysis as to what happened in our past. And our past is full of stories. We just need to uncover them.
Where you're right, Aditi, I feel like you definitely have a couple of books in you about, the history
Oh,
of
I
India.
wish. I
And
wish.
in the long term, I think because the way you talk about some of these events, for a lot of us, they just seem like dates or they seem like
Yeah,
things that happened in the past. But as I read that piece, I understood that there was so much more to that particular period. And even your recent articles where you've been profiling different women, and I know it's also inspired by another book you read.
yeah,
I read the piece you wrote about Rukma Bai, who,
yeah.
and even about the there was another piece you wrote about a person from Kerala.
Dr. Mary Poonen Lokos.
Correct. Yeah. And
Yeah,
both these pieces were just such a fascinating deep dive and profile about two
yeah,
individuals that were able to build something for themselves with so many challenges, because it
yeah,
was so uncommon to be able to. achieve that kind of education at that time,
Mhm.
people from
Mm.
most sections, because we were in that. So if you could tell me the story about these two women and, you know, how you, what you learned from their journey, more than uh, how you wrote the piece, that would be really interesting to understand. Like, what did you pick out about what they did in their lives and what was special about them and their journey in particular?
So, so, um, so the stories come from this particular book. It's called Lady Doctors by Kavita Rao. And so the um, so I've written about Rukmabai, Dr. Mary Poon and Lucas, and Muthu Lakshmi Reddy. Um, and when you read these women's stories, a picture emerges of India at that time. Like, what were the perceptions that people held? Like, today you might scoff, oh my god, um, of course, women should go out and pursue whatever they want to pursue. But at that time, it was women were behind the zina. They were behind the parda. They were not allowed to work. And you have to today, our challenges today are very different than the challenges they faced
Yeah.
in their time. And we have to understand that they surmounted so many challenges. Like Zukma Bai, she was a child bride. She came from a really educated family, and she was educated, but she was still married off at a very young age. And she did not want to be married off. She wanted to study further. So she had another set of challenges to face. And when you read the stories together, a picture of India emerges, which you don't see today. And these women, um, they worked at Rukmabai worked at the Kama hospital. Her mentor worked at Kama hospital. She worked in a hospital in Surat. She was instrumental when um, she was instrumental when the epidemic came. No, epidemic when it came to India. Um, so all of these women played a critical part in the health infrastructure which we enjoy today. They were
Mhm.
instrumental in framing the public infrastructure, and their stories are not told, and we are not aware. I used to live half an hour away from a Kama hospital, but we only heard about Kama when the attacks happened.
Yeah.
It's we should, especially being a woman, we should know more about these stories because they give us power. Like, if you see, like, what are superheroes, they're basically, these women were real superheroes, and we should cherish them, and their stories should be told. And I think they teach us a lot. They teach us that you can fight the system, and sometimes you have to fight solo. Sometimes you might have help, but sometimes you might fight solo. And there are really many things to take away from them and be grateful for, that you have these women who did all these things for you. And today we might take public infrastructure like health, especially, for granted, but that was not always the case. So, yeah,
Yeah, like, and I highly recommend that book by Kavita Rao, which
yeah,
after reading your profile, I wanted to actually buy a copy, which I will, get
yeah,
very soon. And I think it's an amazing profile of, these women that were able to, not only contribute to society but build a life for themselves, facing, so many odds that
yeah,
we may take for granted today, but were not available to everyone at that point of
yeah,
time. And another book I read recently, Aditi, was I read this book called The Romanovs by Simon Sebag Montefiore, and
yeah,
I really enjoyed that book because it showed me how one family ruled Russia for 300 years.
yeah,
And it also showed me how power and money can also change humans in a particular way. And,
yeah,
it, and after the Romanov dynasty came to an end, you had the Bolshevik Revolution, and then, eventually that led to communism in that
mm,
part of the world. And I just thought it was so interesting. We often hear the story of communism, and how Russia became the Soviet Union. But this story of a family that ruled Russia for 300 years, maybe is not as commonly told. And the experience of people in that period where there was a lot of poverty, a lot of famine, it really helped me understand maybe why people thought a particular way. Again, I
mm,
may be wrong, they may be wrong, but understanding things historically show you
yeah,
so much about why
yeah,
people make certain decisions. So I
yeah,
know you've written a lot about the French monarchy, and
yeah.
I'm curious about your thoughts about what happened in that part of the world in that period. If you could tell me, because one of my favorite pieces that you wrote was about the French monarchy, and I don't remember the exact title, but if you could break down that piece for me, uh,
Mm.
I'm just curious in that regard.
For sure. I'm so glad you liked it. It initially, I wrote a three-part series on how the French Revolution, um, um, the money problems which actually were behind the French Revolution, why the French were starving while the monarchy was enjoying its privileges. Um, so I was just reading a book on the French Revolution, examining it from how the society was structured, how it was meant to oppress one section, and the cream de la cream of the population would enjoy from oppressing the majority of the population. And I was thinking, okay, so this seems really interesting. There is a huge money part in the sense, um, so how can I craft an article which covers these aspects? And um, that was my initial thinking when I was writing the first piece. And then as I went deeper and deeper, I realized that there's a huge social role that the French Revolution played, like the way the society was structured, the it was divided into the first, second, and third um, estates, and how the first and the second would oppress the third estate. And even monetarily, um, there were lottery schemes and annuities, all benefiting just the privileged at the cost of the minority. And I think that's where some of the most uh, beautiful stories lie, when you're looking at the intersection of history and money. And because money always leaves a trail, like you can follow the money trail to find the best stories. And that's what I try and do with my articles, is that um, try and understand the different aspects surrounding a story, and give the reader as much detail so that they can experience a slice of history. Um, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, your voice.
You're good. I
Yeah.
muted myself. So
Ah,
I was just curious that insight is so crucial, that
yeah.
connection between history and money, because that
Yeah.
can tell you a lot about why people acted a certain way. And
Yeah.
this question is a little more open-ended, Aditi, and it does. I know it's not something you can answer in like one go, but money, the idea of
Yeah.
money, like where did that emerge, and like how how has it evolved over time, like if you can throw some light on that. Or I don't know if that's a good question or if it makes sense, but why do humans use money and not another form to exchange value in a way?
Why do we use money and not another form to exchange value?
Or like, I know at a certain time we had the barter system, and then
Mm-hmm.
we eventually moved to using money as a way to trade value. So
Mm-hmm.
because I'm just thinking about more modern forms of exchanging value, like bitcoins, or you know
Yeah.
like, or like, what fascinates you about the idea of money? I don't know. I mean, it's
No, no, I understand where you're coming from. It's so money as it's I like to follow money because it shows where your incentives are. Um it um as a leader, like you can say anything, but where you put your money, where you it shows intention. It shows um this is where you are going. And um with money you can set up long lasting foundations. You can see to how money has played a big role in like the 12th 13th centuries, the 17th 18th centuries. um and you can and um you can see like a clear graph as to uh the haves and the haves not, and
Mm.
what sort of generational wealth. Like again, the French Revolution, they enjoyed generational wealth for 2 centuries, 2.5 centuries, and they built generational wealth by just taxing the poor and not taxing the rich, which goes against what we now know, that you should tax the rich, but they tax the poor. And from there, you can follow, oh, okay, this is why people got mad. This is why the French Revolution started. Could something, if they did not have bad harvests, would the French Revolution not have happened? No, it would have happened. It was just taken longer. That was a great. So because the harvest, because there wasn't enough food to go around, the revolution started. Would it? So I'm. Uh, I try and follow the money because at the end, you at the end it's all human stories. You want to understand humans of another century and what is the best way to understand them. And I think that's why everyone else likes money also, because words are cheap, money isn't. And yeah, I hope that answers your question.
No,
I
that was great, and like because like in my limited reading of the history that I was exposed to, I've noticed how, especially if you look at our colonial history, very
Yeah,
often economic power was transferred into military power, which was then
yeah,
transferred into political power. And also in terms of how the colonies were shaped, where the countries that had a strong military sort of establishment with the navy, were able to control resources in another territory. Again, it's not as simple as that. I think there are so many more factors, which
yeah,
goes back to your point about knowing the stories. But I
yeah,
feel like to really understand history, looking at where the money
yeah,
went is an interesting vantage point. So, and further, I will be linking your pieces in the show notes as well, because
thank you so
I'm glad
much.
we got to go through a couple of your articles or your
Yeah,
pieces, Aditi. Like in terms of crafting your piece, is there a particular structure you follow, like an introduction, a body, and a conclusion, or like
um,
the normal way an essay is structured is you have a like a thesis statement with three supporting arguments. So do you
yeah,
have any like outline when you write a piece, or is it more unstructured
no.
than that?
So what I try and do for most of my pieces is I make a problem statement. So it's very short, and I try to make it as concise as possible, because otherwise um otherwise there's no end to a piece. Like you have to um so for my how British controlled princely controlled India, there was a very concise problem statement that um the problem statement was how did British take charge of the rulers, and how did they manipulate them. And then I would just try and stick within that, because otherwise it becomes I'll try and connect the whole world, and it won't make sense, and there are deadlines to be met. So it starts off with that, and then I try and see, have I got as many perspectives as I can? Is there someone whose perspective I'm missing? Um, then I try and, like, where is the money? Where did the money flow from? Um, was there an oppressor and an oppressed party? Um, then I uh, in the end, I try and I link it to the present as to how this past historical event affects our present today, or what can we learn about that time period, and what were the challenges that at that time seemed insurmountable. Um, that is my general flow. Yes.
Very,
So there's
very.
no precise steps, but this is where I generally arrive at.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Aditi. And like, I have so many more questions to ask you, but just to respect time, and I hope we get to do this again.
Yes, me
Maybe to
too.
preview more of your work and your writing in the future. But Aditi, for the last question, I just had like just a general question about any recommendations you have for maybe newsletters, podcasts, films, documentaries. Could be anything. If you could give me like two or three recommendations, because I'm very curious about
Yeah,
this world of history, finance, and money. So,
yeah.
like, any
Uh,
recommendations in this regard?
yes. So my favorite podcast is Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. He is a fantastic storyteller. Um, and again, I've actually learned from him. Uh, get as many perspectives as you can. It um so this is again it's like, people say that, oh, people have very short attention spans. It's actually not true. People want detail. People want to be lost in an experience. They want emotion. You give them details. Don't give unnecessary details, but be be open to showing as much context as is relevant. So Dan Carlin taught me that, and um, so highly recommend his Hardcore History. Um, he's I love Matt Levine. The way he writes a Bloomberg newsletter. It's called Money Stuff, and it's his style of writing. He's explaining a concept by linking what is happening in finance in the real world, and I think it's beautiful. Like, he's crafted his own narrative voice, which is you read his articles and you know that's Matt Levine talking. And I aspire to write as well as him. Um, I really enjoy reading FT Alphaville. They have um, amazing uh, insights, and again, in today's financial world, for um, Manu Pillai is a fantastic author. Again, Indian history. He wrote Ivory Throne and um, Deccan Kings. No, I'm pretty sure I'm naming that wrong, but amazing author. And yeah, that's all I can. There's so many, like this is all I'm coming up with right now. But yeah, highly recommend.
These are great starts, and I know earlier in the show you also recommended a couple of writers, so I will include all of these in the show notes as well, Aditi. But thank you. I know an hour just went by
Oh,
just
I'm
listening.
sorry. I'm sorry. Amit Verma, The Seen and the Unseen. And sorry, I'm sorry to cut you off, but again, Amit Verma and Aja Shaun, Everything is Everything. Everything is a YouTube show. Uh, so they're shorter formats, but incredible topics, um, um, and the way they explain concepts is really engaging. Like, I wish they were. teachers in school. Like I was like, uh, it's it's beautiful, and like you can really learn a lot from them. Sorry, I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, no, I love Amit Verma's podcast. One of the
Yeah.
reasons I started this was because I heard him speaking, and I was fortunate
Mm.
to know of him through another friend early on. So I
Oh.
I remember listening to him like in
Mm.
person at a couple of conferences, but I definitely think Seen and Unseen is one of the great podcasts coming
Yeah,
out of India
for
because
sure.
the form of conversations, the in depth. There are four. I know there was recently a 12-hour podcast that he had
Yeah,
released. So,
yeah.
and I think it shows,
Unbelievable.
yeah, because it shows you that people are open to listening to these
Yes.
ideas if you present it in a way that's engaging and exciting, which I
Yeah,
truly think history really is. Where if
it
you
really is.
tell stories in a particular way, I think
Yeah.
there's nothing as fascinating as history because there are so many elements, so many characters to follow. So, on that positive note, Aditi, we come to an end of this particular episode of Learning Stories. For the
Yeah.
listeners tuning in, I will be linking Aditi's amazing newsletter, Filtered Copy. Or how do I say it, Aditi? Is it Filtered
Filtered
Copy?
coffee. You said it right. Filtered coffee.
Which is this amazing drink, but I think it's fun
Yeah.
on that particular drink. And I highly recommend going through the archives to understand Aditi's work better because I think there are so many gems in her earlier pieces that you may miss out on if you only focus on the later pieces. So that is
Hmm.
like some of your homework after this particular podcast episode. And Aditi, thank you again. I really appreciate your time. Any
Thank you
last
so
thoughts?
much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for talking to me and listening to me ramble on. And yeah, th- um, I I love your podcast, and I listen to them. So thank you so much for your time and for doing this.
Thanks, Aditi. And for the listeners tuning in, until next time, stay tuned for more such stories of amazing young Indians defining their futures and the world's future in their own unique ways. And until next time, keep learning.
Thank you.